Hi, everyone. This is episode 17 of Sketchy Talk, and joining us today is Ann Taylor. She is a Wellington editor and print designer living on the coast of beautiful capital of New Zealand. And she connected with USK Wellington Urban Sketchers in 2017 as her family had moved back to Wellington from a rural region north of the capital, and she wanted to meet new people there. Since then, she's been urban sketching and has been part of the global community of sketchers. Tell me a little bit about your background. You said that we were just talking before I started recording about you going to school in London. Tell me a little bit about that program and how you actually eventually ended up in London and then ended back up in New Zealand.
Well, kia ora, Christina. That's hello in Maori, and you'll know that because you were at the symposium and we had a lot of
Yes.
Maori input, so you probably maybe remember that phrase. Yes, I did. I don't, looking back, it wasn't so imaginative in a way, but once I was 21, I headed over to London. I guess for a long time, New Zealanders, that's Pākehā New Zealanders, New Zealanders of European descent actually kept thinking of England as home in a way. It was English culture was sort of very dominant in New Zealand society, education, and so on. And it was something that my mum had done with her friends in a Volkswagen van in the 60s, go over to London before you kind of settle down on a career, etc. So I graduated from university in Christchurch in the South Island. And I was just hell bent on breaking out, getting overseas, exploring London. And I guess a lot of Kiwis used to go to London. We called it the big OE, the big overseas experience. And it was just sort of getting that overseas experience and getting over to Europe and the bigger world outside our little island down in the South Pacific. And we knew that we could speak the language and there's good working visa arrangements between, at that time, New Zealand and England. And so I just graduated from university. I'd done a degree in art history and English literature. And I just it was me heading over to forge my way in the world, get my first, proper job, so to speak. And I was really keen to get into the publishing industry in some shape or form. And I ended up working on at a health charity and working on their publications and their magazines. But I think it was really through a boyfriend at the time that I got back into my art, which is something that I had loved right from childhood. But I'd kind of put it on hold because, shock horror, I didn't get the good enough grades to get into art school when I left high school back in New Zealand. And I hadn't really developed a plan B. So I just went into the English and art history route, and because writing was something I really enjoyed as well. But this boyfriend was quite inspirational. He was a photographer. He was a keen mountain biker. And I just got myself a mountain bike. This was in the early 90s in London. And we just started going on holidays around England. We were both working. I was working on the health charity magazine. But he was really encouraging because he had his own art practice and he just got me. He was interested in what I'd done in the past and just encouraged me to the extent that I think we went on a holiday in Norfolk on the
Mm-hmm.
East Coast one time. We took the train, took the bikes, etc. And it was middle of winter, so there was actually snow on this beautiful beach. And he'd encouraged me to take some just pieces of wood, and probably just acrylic paints, and we primed up some boards, and he'd done the same thing, and we just shoved them in our backpacks. And then it was like, let's paint on the beach, let's go on a walk and take our gear, and he'd do his photography and was encouraging. So then that led me to sort of thinking a bit more about it. And in London, it's a massive city and there's just so many amazing adult education institutes dotted all around town. And so I just signed up I had my full-time job, but in the evenings, I attended some really great evening classes with some inspirational tutors, and particularly memorable was a course, painting from life, and we made a great big canvas each on the first day, on the first evening, probably sort of 1.5 meters wide by 1 meter.
Wow.
And
That's
then
huge.
yeah, and then we were just encouraged to sort of rip into it with poster. We had a poster paints and very old scruffy looking brushes lined up at the old kitchen sink, just as it had been in primary school, and we were encouraged to rip in. And I remember the teacher was really inspirational, because I think it would be like a 2.5 hour evening class, and we just had to get in there and be bold. And I remember the tutor, he would come round, look at our work, and if someone was getting too tight and finicky, we had the live model there in front of us. If someone was just getting to that stage, we all probably identify with getting too precious, too tight, titivating, fussing around with details, he would just say, right, put your canvas down from your easel, down onto the floor. And he would get us to, with the bucket of water that we've been washing our brushes in, just tip a bit of water across the surface of our canvas and just
Wow.
refresh it. So that, I think that was really significant, because it broke down that fear, that nervousness that sometimes stymies and restricts our creative process in our work. And you can see it in your work when you start getting like that, can't you? So I think it was, that course was as much about the process of learning this bold approach and confidence, and realizing that, after you put your painting back on the easel, and the water ran onto the
Yeah.
concrete floor, sometimes you had to sort of, you had to start with something fresh and kind of better than all the stuff that you'd agonized over. You could still see some traces of what you'd done, but there was now this looseness and this fresh air that had been let into your work. So I think that was a really great thing. Not something necessarily you can do, on your page in your sketchbook, but that was a good approach. So I just keeping, my professional work going. And as I say, I was there for 9 years, but I had some really enriching courses that were just freely and pretty cheaply available to anyone. And towards the end of the time where I started, really the pull to get back to New Zealand was getting stronger. I did do a year part-time course at another of these institutes just down the road from St Paul's Cathedral, and it was a foundation course. So it introduced us to illustration, to textiles, to sculpture, to painting, to printmaking. So I guess I don't know whether you have something like that in the States. It was probably equivalent to the first year of a degree course that introduced you to a range of different mediums and approaches, and then you could then from there choose what you wanted to pursue. But yeah, so
It's
I
pretty
really
cool.
benefited from the education, the sort of cheapish, accessible education for all.
Yeah, they have some community classes that most of the art schools have locally that you can take advantage of that have like life painting and that sort of thing. But that sounds like a really nice opportunity, especially when you were doing design this whole time, right? You were working as
Uh,
a designer.
no, and I was actually drawing more on my writing
Ah, I see.
writing skills. So I kind of learnt on the job at this health magazine, and they were producing a magazine that went to their members, and it was educational, and it was aiming at trying to get patients with this condition, taking charge of their lives and taking charge of their condition. It was for the British Diabetic Association. So it was a big charity, and it had members and groups all across the country. So I was writing about, I was interviewing people with diabetes. I would be sent, there were a few instances I was sent around on the train to different locations in England, and to interview people who were perhaps doing interesting or unusual things, but managing diabetes within their lives. And I also interviewed health researchers and doctors and specialists at the big hospitals in London. And it was all about trying to put sometimes quite technical information into really accessible, interesting, lively stories. So feature writing and editing and proofing. And then they started producing a range of other little educational booklets and leaflets. So I started I was special projects editor as well there for a while, overseeing production of material from writing. Often I'd be the writer or editor, and then right through the print production process. So that was what I was doing, and art was very much on the sideline. And then it wasn't until I returned to New Zealand and started that process. I didn't actually do a professional design course or degree. I kind of, as a young mother in this rural region north of Wellington, decided that I wanted to do that and just kind of put that message out there to the local print company. And they put me in touch with a guy who had to do, within a very short time, he was a freelance designer, a print designer, and he had to do a project of 50 educational readers for a New York publisher. And he was kind of a lifestyle farmer, and he had worked at Learning Media, which was a big sort of government funded school publications organization in Wellington. But he'd gone freelance himself, so he could have raise sheep and have his horses and so on. So he was just in his office in this country town that I was also living in. So I jumped on sort of as an apprentice, and we worked for quite an intense 3 months producing these 50 educational readers for school kids. So I was commissioning illustrations, and I was laying out pages to a templated design in Adobe InDesign. So it was actually like a classic apprenticeship, learning on the job, and he was sitting there next to me.
Oh, that's so interesting. I've illustrated readers before, so I'm very familiar with those types of publications.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, so I didn't realize you had such a robust writing background. That's really interesting. And that also sort of seems to be something that would really inform making a sketching practice too, because you mentioned in your bio that you started doing reportage and that sort of thing, and that seems to be a nice fusion of both of your skill sets.
I think some way into connecting with Urban Sketches Wellington. Obviously, then the whole global community opens up, because you go onto the urbansketches.org website, and you start looking at Instagram, and you hear these names floating around of, have you seen this person's work? Have you seen Christina's work? Have you seen, I think somehow I got onto Simo Capesci, who is based in Italy. And I looked at a project that she'd done. She'd sort of climbed up a mast on a beautiful yacht cruising around Sicily or one of those islands. And I just thought that was the most brilliant thing. I mean, I really, her viewpoints, and the fact that she was creating a type of travel journal, and the fact that she would write snippets of dialogue, and she was very much documenting. It was almost like, there was a really close crossover between, for me, being almost a reporter or journalist, and doing a feature interview and going to a person's home and noting the details there and trying to incorporate those into a story with words. And obviously reportage, where you've got the two wonderful things going together. And of course, Gabi's, I think I would have encountered Gabi's approach pretty early on, and that was inspirational. The fact that he was actually a journalist and working in the Seattle area. So, and I think even before I'd connected with USK, I'd been blown away seeing sketch journaling, people's amazing travel journals as well. So that really resonated with me. But I think it took me a while to get the confidence as an urban sketcher to go out and think, right, I'm going to document this event, because, in the early days, and because I'm not a professional artist, I'm really self-taught with what I do. Yeah, did take some confidence to do that, because you're worried about, being your own disappointment when you see, what you've done on the page. And you just don't have that confidence yet to think that you can capture people in motion. But I think what was really great was some of the Instagram challenges like Inktober. I think that was, I jumped on there to try and push myself forward early on, and that they had that challenge 100 people in a month,
Yes, yes.
and that
Which they
was
still do,
really,
I think.
yeah, they do. And I think I started with Inktober and producing something every day to following a word. That was
Mm-hmm.
a new thing. And it seemed like so much drawing in one day to do a 15-minute drawing. It was almost impossible, because you're struggling with that self-doubt and confidence thing as well. But that was very freeing because you just, after the day 4, you kind of let go and think, okay, well, it doesn't really matter. I don't need to show this to anyone. I'm doing this for myself. I'm doing it to progress. And then, yeah, so it was a while before I um, could say that I was actually doing some reportage. But yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
was that was another step to take my sketchbook on. That was 2019. I went along on there was a big youth climate march on the Friday morning, and so I was walking along with the marchers progressing from our city square to Parliament, where
Oh, wow.
I work now. So it was a kind of 2K route with the students, with teachers, with parents, and I was drawing along the way. So that was great. And then crazy thing that happened, and I think a lot of us were hopeful that it was going to make the national news because there was a huge turnout. And then got back home on the bus. Hours later, I think I got a phone call from a friend in Christchurch, and she says, "Have you seen the news? Switch the news on." And it was actually the Christchurch mosque shooting,
Oh,
where
man.
a
I remember that.
person person took a gun out. Well, was it a semi-automatic or something, and shot, actually killed around, I think, over 50 people who were attending prayers in a mosque in Christchurch. And then it was across 2 mosques actually, because he then got himself down to another mosque where they were having
Mm-hmm.
Friday prayers as well. So that, and then so that was what was reported on the news. And then on Saturday, I was in the reportage mode. So I thought, okay, I'll get myself down. We have a mosque in Kilburnie, which is a suburb, kind of a neighbouring suburb to us, and just go down there and go down with a small sketchbook. And it does become a way of understanding things. And so from that day, I have, those couple of days, they were quite they were quite vivid, and now I've got some documentation of those 2 days, totally different events. But
Wow.
that was 2019. So, and I'm pleased. I have in the book that I self-published this year with my sketching group. I have
Mm-hmm.
some of those images from the protest, the climate protest. I haven't put anything in from the what was happening at the mosque, but that was a very strange time for New Zealand because our police do carry guns, like
Mm-hmm.
little pistols. Sort of, I'm not a bloke, so I'm probably not using the right terminology. But
No worries. We get the idea.
certainly it was strange for us because we saw on our streets, which was a really rare thing for us, police in bulletproof vests with rifles, and there was a
Mm-hmm.
policeman with a rifle at the mosque, and there's a big bush covered
Wow.
hill next door, and he was not focused on people entering the mosque to pay their respects and lay flowers, but he was completely focused on the hills above the mosque. And someone said, well, he's looking for snipers. And it
Wow.
just seemed totally unreal for us here in New Zealand because we actually do have behind the scenes quite high numbers of levels of gun ownership, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not something that's, part of our culture on the streets, whereas it's a kind of a different scene in America.
Definitely
Um,
it is. I mean, it's pretty horrifying. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, much worse. And hopefully one day, people will come to their senses and change that.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, so when you, I mean, yeah, and I have copies of a copy of your book here, and it's really a really nice book. And we will I'll have a link in the show notes for people to order it. When did you start your regular sketching practice? Because you said you started with Inktober and stuff. Was that before you were doing urban sketching, or were you doing urban sketching earlier than that?
Uh, well, I think Inktober was in the early days soon after connecting with Urban Sketches Wellington, which I did. I don't know how it was on my radar, but I just had that goal of trying to. I had lived in Wellington before, but I wanted to meet new people and kind of get involved, on the ground in some way in the community in Wellington.
Mm-hmm.
Keep that going as well. And but as I said, I think I was that child who always had pen and paper and colored pencils and crayons and absolutely loved all of that before I
So your
started
sketching
school.
practice has been a long time.
Well, I think I told you about the instance where, thinking back, I was kind of doing that on my own. And one memory I do have is when I was aged 9 on a family holiday, and we were driving through, me and my brother with my parents in the front seats, driving through an area called the Volcanic Plateau in the centre of the North Island. And it's a really spectacular, windswept, exposed landscape, and it's been created by the still active volcano Mount Narahoe,
Mm-hmm.
and also Mount Tongariro, where there's a big ski field and so on. But it's an ash landscape with tussock, miles and miles of tussock,
Mm-hmm.
and really spectacular place to drive through. And I just remember that I did a sketch of that mountain. It's a
Oh,
conical
that's so
shaped
cool.
mountain. From the back seat of the car, I was obviously had to take my pen and paper on a holiday. That was a given. To do drawing inside, that was my happy place. But I had it on my lap and just drew that conical shape as we were passing by. And yeah, that's an urban sketch, isn't it? And I just remember that feeling. It was sort of a quiet sense of pride. Gee, look at, there is a mountain on my page. I can see it, and yes, it looks like
That's
what's out the
cool.
window. So that was an urban sketch, and a lot of our primary school lives were spent doing projects and drawing and writing about countries, writing about field trips, and then it was expected that we'd also illustrate and put captions, and then often those books would be put together, stapled together and put in the front, creating a kind of library of children's work. I don't know whether children do that so much anymore because they're
No,
on
but that's a great.
this,
Well, I mean, zines. I mean, sometimes like
yeah,
people do
like
zines
zines.
and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the same. I guess a
Mm.
similar practice. So have you always journaled as well? Have you always kept like
Inter
journaling
yeah,
practice as well? Yeah, with the writing.
intermittently. I think around that same time, around the age of 9 years old, my brother and I were both given little children's diaries, and they only had but they were actually for that year. It was very
Mm-hmm.
exciting. You could see the year, yeah, laid out in front of you, and there was maybe 4 lines for each day. But I think that was quite a game changer as well, because I did do that, and we both kept that up. That became a sort of regular gift. We kept that up, and I do have a couple of them, and they're pretty funny to read. And I
Mm-hmm.
was doing that through high school as well. And then I think I took a journal with me on my overseas experience, which I definitely have. And it does paint the picture of a tortured soul,
That's
leaving
really
my
cool.
and the I mean, I need glasses now to read it because, it's so dense, it's so intense, tiny writing, and it's all filled with what I've been reading and the remnants of my university. I loved university. I loved having my head in books and literary theory and classics, Jane Austen we covered, and all of that stuff, and English Renaissance poetry. And my head
Mm-hmm.
was full of my art history and so on. And I just was getting it all down. But I think I've sort of kind of at some point put a stop to it because it was really stirring up a kind of melancholic navel gazing side of my personality that I didn't necessarily want. But I think, yeah, now, well, our sketchbooks to a certain extent do become like a diary because they just bring, you open a page of your sketchbook and it may or may not have some notes about what you were doing. And it doesn't, not, my sketchbooks aren't filled with reportage, but it really takes you back to that time and place, doesn't it? You can
Yes,
remember where
yes.
you were, what the weather was like, sometimes who you were with. So and I sort of have thought, okay, that removes that component of diary writing. Do you know what I mean? That agonized,
Yes. Well,
tortured.
I've been trying to in my sketch practice add more writing and
Yes,
detail
I've
because
seen that. It's
because
fantastic.
I because that's not like my natural default. And that's the thing that I admire with your skill is that you are a writer too. And I feel like writing has been a little bit more difficult for me because I
Yes.
think so visually. I'd rather draw it. Like even when I draw comics or that sort of thing, a lot of times I will draw it first and then add like dialogue and that sort of thing later because I see it
Mm,
more visually. And that was one
yes.
thing that was a very different practice when doing, sketching here and everywhere was because, I don't tend to, I had to keep adding to the writing because that's not my natural default
Default.
is
Yeah.
writing a lot. And so I've been trying to get better about that and adding it to my sketch practice more. And so with the travelogue that I'm working on, I tried to write every day, but I've still had to
Mm,
embellish that because I didn't write a lot every day. Like it's probably the opposite of what you were describing when you were in London, where you wrote a lot and tiny
mm,
writing and stuff. I've never really written like that, and I admire
mm.
people that do write like that. And it sounds like you kind of have gone a little bit the opposite way, drawing and less writing with your sketch practice, or would you do you sometimes write a couple pages in your sketchbook too still?
I've started recently. What has been my approach? I've started recently. I've got quite a, is it Fabriano? I've got a nice A4 sketchbook, Fabriano sketchbook. It's that beautiful one that's got the like red bricks all over the cover.
Uh-huh.
I think is it produced in Florence or something? And I just, yeah.
I'll have
And
to
so
look that up. I don't know if I've seen that one before.
Is it Fabrizio or Fabriano? Anyway, it's
We'll put
pretty
a link in the
gorgeous.
show notes.
We'll clarify that. So when you open it, it's very book-like. It's got a hardcover, and so you've essentially got an A4 sheet on either side. And I think I'd seen, was it Becky? And I'm not sure how to pronounce her surname. It's Gao. I think it will be a Chinese name, Becky
Mm-hmm.
Gao. And she was doing these double page spreads pretty much daily. And she'd often have her cup of coffee and her bun on, in the foreground, as if on her table. And then she had her view out her window in the background. And she'd have her cake and she'd have maybe some on the other page, the right hand page, she'd have something that had also occurred to her in the day. But it was quite still life and scenery based. And I just thought, okay, it's sort of working bigger. It's working across two pages, treating it as almost like a book format. So I'm going to try to sort of document my days a little bit more. So that's when, yeah, I have recently started doing some of those large pages. And
Nice.
I've tried to, I'm quite a color person. I love color and I'm quite fascinated by unusual limited color ranges. And there's lots of stuff on, that other wonderful urban sketches do where they've perhaps got two kind of a warm color and a cool color. And
Mm-hmm,
it's
mm-hmm.
not necessarily naturalistic, but they'll just use those as their limited medium and they'll approach, they might have a cool purple and a hot orange, but they'll approach the scene out of their window with those two colors and some line work. So I've been doing these spreads and I've been curating in them in the sense that I want a color scheme on that page. So I had a yellow and black page, which was, drawing my husband on the couch,
Mm-hmm.
watching his on his iPad, and then I put a few things. I tried to give a sense of that evening by drawing a few things from on the table. In that case, I drew my sketching materials, and I kept it all in a sort of black and yellow color scheme, and that was quite satisfying. There were a few things going on in that way, and then I just, yeah, I mean, yeah, we're like we were saying,
Mm-hmm.
words just, I guess words, it's almost maybe words come first and writing about a scene come first in my head. And
Mm-hmm.
then, my sketches I'm trying to convey what I'm thinking about the scene and I could write an essay on the scene or the climate protest or that evening with my husband. But yeah, it's interesting because I think you were talking about this thing with someone else, weren't you, about how you're kind of stepping into that new territory of writing about your experience, where I guess, yeah, writing about my experience has always been really natural, and sketching and illustrating is a new thing for me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
And you have, looking at your biography here, you've done a lot of publications, and
yeah.
worked a lot on print media. How did you? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that you work on drawing attention for urban sketchers. How long have you been doing that? What got you into doing that?
I just saw a call out, and it was probably Brenda Murray, who was the communications director at that time, back at the end of 2017. So yeah, I'd
Mm-hmm.
freshly gotten connected with the Wellington group, and then just become really interested in the whole community. And I jumped
Mm-hmm.
on the website, and I think I saw a call out for some volunteer writers for the newsletter. And then so I emailed Brenda, and then I think we had a Zoom, and she mentioned that they were thinking about putting drawing and teaching newsletter into a different format, like more a magazine style, still digital. But and then I just said, well, I'd be interested in doing some writing, but I also have these design skills, that and I was doing some freelance publications and magazines at that time too. So then we just got our heads together, and she said, "Well, let's come up with a new format for the newsletter." So drawing attention grew out of that. We had the concept that it's the official zine or magazine, which is
Mm-hmm.
online for Urban Sketches community. So that we kicked off with the first issue in January 2018. So I've been doing it ever since. And I kind of can't believe it, but for quite a while there, it was monthly. Or no, was
I
it monthly or 2 monthly? That must have
That's
been two
amazing.
monthly.
I mean, the amount of work
It's,
that was in that. I mean,
oh,
that's a huge body of work. It's really amazing.
So at that point, working with Brenda, she was very much the editor, managing editor, proofreader, sub editor,
Uh-huh.
and planner. And I was the layout person. But now it's evolved that I'm kind of, I would say, co managing editor or co editor with Jane Wingfield, who's based in Seattle. And Jane, the way it works, we're just doing it quarterly. We've been doing it quarterly for a few years now. And the way it works is Jane is kind of more of the key person in the early stages. So receiving story ideas and so on, contributions and news from the global sketching community. So Jane's kind of teeing that up and doing a bit of back and forth with contributors. And also sometimes writing herself. And then I kick in sort of 1 month out, pretty much on copy deadline. So I kick in then editing, sub editing, kind of massaging and sort of refining stories a bit sometimes. So she's done all the groundwork, and she does sub editing as well on it. And then I go into the layout mode and arranging on the page, and we work in that way. And we
Wow.
also do have some lovely, we've got a strong base of proofreaders now, so that's taken off our hands, whereas that used to be, I think, Patricia Wong was the editor for quite some time, and Patricia was she was pouring hours and hours of effort into it, and she pretty much proofread the whole thing each time, as well as doing all the preliminary stuff that Jane now does. So we've got
Mm-hmm.
a good team of proofreaders, and we do have some, contributors from the community who write. who've been writing regularly for us. So it's a really team effort.
Well, I mean,
Um,
it's an amazing publication. And how did you you recently did a book. We referenced it earlier. What was the genesis of that? How did you start to get the idea to do the book about the Sketchers in
sure.
Wellington?
Well, I guess I just at some point the bulb came on about, hey, actually I've laid out lots of books for other people. I've written lots of interviews with people, and I've proofread, I've edited, I've designed, I've done sketching. Why don't I just, and I've also done some promotions. Did work as a publicist, and I would sometimes design a book for a person and then help with the publicity and marketing. So at some point the penny dropped, and I thought, why don't I actually use all my skills? It's kind of every step of the process is pretty familiar. Let's do it. And I'd always been blown away and particularly love the huge variety of styles and approaches that I was seeing in my Wellington group when we get together for our monthly meetups. As much the people who were coming to it knew as the people who'd been sketching and were almost, well, what I would say is a profession. They could choose to be professional illustrators if they so wished. So I just loved that democratic nature of the group and thought it would be really great to bring that all together in one publication. So that's when I started I guess I'm a bit embarrassed to think I published the book, self-published it using Kindle self-publishing, which
Oh,
is
yeah, that's a great way to
under
do it. That meant I
under
could
the
order it.
yeah, that's right, exactly.
I
See you
didn't
at the
have.
symposium, and then boom,
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
ordered it. And it's great as well because I did look into I sort of ethically thought it would be great to have it printed in Wellington by a Wellington printer, but I looked into that, and the unit cost would have been. I think the prices also went up hugely. The unit cost in August last year was going to be something like $16 per copy, and
Wow.
then it went up to something like $23 per copy at the start of this year. And I just thought, well, I'm going to have to, and I'm not like you. I haven't got all over, was it Kickstart or
Yeah.
Patreon and that sort of stuff. I've still got to learn that concept, and I don't know whether it would come so naturally for me, this idea of really putting myself out there and gathering in funds. But I guess it's just another of those things that seems unachievable. And then if you make small steps towards it, then you get into the swing of it, and lots of people doing it, etc., etc. I'm not rolling it out, but at that
Mm.
time, at the start of the year, it was like, okay, well, me and my partner, we've got to sort of stump up this quite significant amount of money up front for printing, and then also to recover some of our costs and some of our time, we're going to have to make it quite an unrealistic price. So then we just decided, yeah, let's do the Amazon thing. But
How
it
long did it
was,
take you to put it together? Like when did you start on it and how long did it, I mean, obviously it was, you probably did it between other things. Like
yeah,
how
very
long did
much,
a
and it was,
a project like this take for you?
yes, I think if I'd been approached this book project like my other work, it should have all been done and dusted in maybe, like 8 months from sort of concept to, working, side by side with my other work. So working my free time. But it was a very weird time. I mean, sort of 2020, I think it's a bit of a blur, like for a lot of listeners.
Yes,
We
for
kicked
everyone,
it.
I think,
We
yes.
kicked into that COVID time, and we, you know, there was a lot of just. I think looking back, there was actually, even though we were kind of we adapted to the lockdowns, we then had, instances of COVID in the family, so that I turned into the, nursemaid and the chef and delivering things and keeping a family member going in a sort of isolated room at home. I think it was quite psychologically disassembling, wasn't it, or disruptive?
It
But
really
then
was.
I feel embarrassed because a lot of people just did absolutely incredible creative projects in lockdown, they wrote books. I met someone, a young woman recently, who taught herself illustration on
Wow.
Procreate, and then illustrated a book. And she's just recently won a book award in the annual New Zealand Children's Book Awards. She didn't
Wow.
write the book, but so that was her her COVID experience. But I guess my book was rumbling along for maybe 3 years.
I
you
was going to
know,
say, it seemed like it would take a while to just by the time everybody turned stuff in and you got high res art.
Exactly,
And
logistically. So I think one of my first approach, I thought with my group, it's quite important rather than just talking about it. And people sometimes eyes glaze over. I decided, using my skills, that it was that I would just. I think I reeled in. I put the word out to a few core members that this is what I want to do. Can you send in some of your sketches? And I would just want to produce some sample pages. So I did it. I had that approach, and I think right from the start, I had a clear idea of what the title was going to be. I'm still really pleased with the title, Pages in the Wind, because it references Wellington is a windy city. And, we're kind of known for that. And there's a bit of, sneering from other cities about the wind in Wellington. But it's quite a beautiful aspect of it as well. But I wanted to sort of put some sample pages in the hands of some key members of our group to try and get that momentum going and that snowball effect. And that thing, yeah, it would become more real for them. So I had quite a clear idea of what the page layout was going to be, because I wanted to divide it into chapters, and I wanted to showcase one sketcher at the opening of each chapter and have their little portrait on that page, and a sort of what is it, a hero image that they'd done of that area we're going to focus on for this chapter, and their words about what the actual experience was for them of doing that sketch, because I wanted for readers to kind of get a taste of what being an urban sketcher is like out there on the ground. So I kick off with the introduction, and I show Andrew James's work. He's there working with his fingerless gloves, and he's actually a meteorologist, and he's talking about being out in Wellington painting and having a gust of wind blow through his sketching materials, and his paper is flying, and his watercolors are splattering on the page, etc. And I guess that speaks to the title as well. It's not always an easy process sketching in Wellington. So I just wanted to bring the sketching process alive in a way for people. And I think that works quite well in the book. And so, yeah, people just nodded and said, yeah, this sounds really good. And then, as you say, it was the logistics of kind of herding. We've got that saying, herding, a little bit like herding cats. So there's 20 sketches represented in the book, and a lot of them were surprised to be asked to be in a book. Oh, I've just started sketching, and my stuff's not very good. I said, I really love, what you're doing. And I said, I want it to be a democratic thing. And I want there to be sketches in the book that have been done in 10 minutes with no thought of showing anyone. We can go right through the spectrum to the things that people have done over several hours, really, sticking their neck out and, observing a beautiful building in all its detail. So we've got this whole range in there, and we've got people who have been sketching for years and people who were just at the time very new to the group. But
and that really captures the spirit of urban sketching.
I think so. That's
Yeah,
what I
mean, I
like.
think that's great. I mean, because so many people think, oh, I'm not good enough to do urban sketching or
Exactly.
whatever. And that's not the point of it. I mean,
No, that's
sort of the
right.
sketch at the end is almost, I mean, that's sort of, that's is not the prime thing you get from the experience in a lot of
Exactly.
ways.
It's the journey, isn't it? And when we look at
Yeah.
our sketches, we remember that day, and we remember, oh, yes, I remember how a truck pulled up just as I was struggling with that perspective.
Yes, yes.
And then I remember that young man came up and started asking me about what I'm doing and why I'm sitting there in the concrete on the cold in the cold,
Exactly, exactly.
and I've tried to incorporate some of those stories into the book. The
Mm-hmm.
funny things that happen, or the unexpected things, or the frustrating things. That's all
Mm-hmm.
part of the urban sketching, as you say. It's about the journey and the process.
Yeah, yeah. It's the
And
sketch. Then sketch is almost a side effect or something. It's like,
exactly, and
it's
and
not the
try, yeah,
prime
yeah,
purpose.
trying to free ourselves from that anxiety about what the finished, the somehow finished sketch is going to be, isn't it? Trying
Yes,
to go with
yes.
the process, just go with the being in the location, being in the moment. And so much of our other activities in life is about producing a finished, reaching a defined end, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So sketching can
So
be
when did
something
the book
different.
come out? Did it come out the beginning of this year, right before the symposium?
It
Or
did.
I mean,
It did. And
that's really that worked out nicely.
that was kind of a spur, that was kind of, and I did have particularly one member of the group who's a very senior person, a manager in the Department of Conservation here in Wellington, and she's a sort of a project leader through and
Mm-hmm.
through. And she was my good accountability person. I acknowledge her in the back of the book. You've got to have that person
Oh
who
yes.
sends you a text or email. So, Anne, haven't heard about the book, for a
Mm-hmm.
while.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening? Okay, yes. Okay. And she also helped me with some of the logistical things. Um, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, people were very good, but a lot of people hadn't even, it was a new thing. They had to photograph their work. They had to I
Mm-hmm.
was giving them tips on getting a good photo on the iPhone and things like that. So it was just sort of talking through people through the process, and then yeah. So finally it was ready for the just, weeks before the symposium, but that was that it's always good to have a deadline. And perhaps that was a problem because it was a personal project, it was a passion project. It was done through that disrupted time. It was done as a sideline. It was a bit too easy just to let it slip. So when I say, 3 years, it's not because it was, it wasn't War and Peace, or uh, you know,
It takes a long time. I mean, I think a lot of people that don't do design don't necessarily realize how long it takes. Like even this,
mm,
travelogue that I'm working on, for my sketching book, I had a designer working on it, and I know it took her a really long time to put everything
mm,
together. And even on this travelogue, even though it's a smaller book, I mean, it takes you a long time by the time you put the text in and clean up the artwork and place it, and then
exactly,
like all of that stuff, and then you print it out and realize you have to do more cleanup, and there's so much
exactly.
stuff. There's so much stuff in the production of any kind of publication that is somewhat hidden unless you've done it, and it's a lot of
Mm,
it's a lot more work than most people probably realize.
absolutely, absolutely. And actually, as a designer and then editor and writer, you sort of the number of times you've looked at that sentence and you've looked at that caption, and as it will be into it's dozens and dozens and dozens, and then right at the end, everything seems to, and also on a book with lots of different people and lots of different styles, it was also about, well, how do I really do justice to this image? And I don't want things to I want things to work harmoniously on the page. So a lot of thought goes into it. And then right at the end of the process, someone new had joined our group, and I just absolutely loved. She was loving Wellington architecture, and I just said to her, "You've got to be in the book too. I don't know how or where, but your stuff's wonderful." And so sort of had to make space for that. There's just hundreds of decisions that you have to make. I mean, that makes it sound, unachievable. It's not, but I think if you were going to embark on it and you say you had knowledge of one side of the process, like publicity, or you had experience in writing, I think you've got to build, you'd have to build a team around you, and to do it as a self-published thing, not a commercial thing, you've got to find other people who have got that skill set, don't you, and would have some volunteer time. Otherwise, it's a professional process, and then it is expensive, paying for a designer and so on. I guess I just happen to have quite a good tool bag after years of doing
Well, yeah, incredible. I know.
uh, that it was achievable. But I don't, yeah, you'd have to, if you were a newcomer to some of these areas, you'd have to do it as a collaborative team.
Well, it seems like, as far as publishing is going, I mean, it seems that, and I've talked on many other podcasts about this, is that self-publishing is really, because of the technology change, becoming the norm rather than the exception. Because I think that
Yes,
publishing, by big, has been so consolidated that it's, at least in the US, and I'm not sure if it's having a similar um, sort of issue in New Zealand, but consolidation has made publishers, and their sort of whole profit model has completely changed, because most people order books on Amazon or order stuff online. There aren't as
yeah,
many bookstores anymore. And so
yes,
now it's more, people find their audience, whether through Kickstarter or through, Urban Sketchers, or through whatever your interest is. If you write romance or whatever, you're
mm,
finding that audience online, and it's sort of cutting out that middleman, because you don't
that's right.
have people going to a bookstore anymore to
Yes,
buy books. And so it's sort of upended the whole
it
process.
really has. It's that's that disruptor technology through and through, isn't
Yes.
it? It
Yeah.
just isn't the same model at all. And I don't fully understand the publishing industry at all, but I do know that, I mean, there's an independent publisher that I've produced books with, and he's kind of an exception. He's an elderly guy now, but he's been publishing a lot of New Zealand history, politics, non-fiction for the last 40 years. And
Oh,
it's
interesting.
it's a husband and wife team, and there's a number of those long-standing independent publishers, and then there's a great Wellington publisher, small press, and then there's people like Penguin and Random House who've
Yes, which are
got a
the
presence
giant. Yeah.
in the giants. And apparently New Zealanders' top hobby is reading. So we are
Oh,
readers in New
interesting.
Zealand. But, yeah, as you say, the publishing industry has been hugely disrupted. And just a lot of people I interact with and know about, yeah, they're going down the self-publishing route. They're getting their head around that process. And as you say, Kickstarter and all of that and broadcast, we're all content creators now, aren't we?
I
And
don't
we're
know if that's
producing.
a good, has good aspects and bad aspects.
Oh, absolutely. But it's a pretty exciting time to be
It
working
really
in,
is.
because otherwise, with a project like mine or yours, you're going sort of you would have, I don't know, last century, early, gone cap in hand and tried to, make yourself, sell yourself and pitch your book idea,
Yeah.
as a bankable commodity. And you may or may not, you know,
You're right. You're right. So do you think you're going to do more books in the future? What is, do you,
yes,
or
Yes, I do, and I think I want to uh, do a book that's pretty much my writing and my sketching.
nice.
Not because it was a horror. It was a lovely process working with the 19 other people in Pages in the Wind, but I mean, it was kind of a proof of concept, proof that I can do it, and so I have definitely started making. I probably need to put some deadlines around it, don't I? Like not just the print, the publication deadline, but some milestone dates, that are going to get me there. But I've definitely started. I'm reading, I'm researching, I'm writing. I've got a journal on the go, and I'm noting down ideas. And yes, it's just what it's like doing that, juggling that
Hmm.
on top of everything else. And maybe I don't know, what do you do for your personal projects? Do you have a dedicated time? Do you get up at, like, one of these people who gets up at 6 in the morning when the house is quiet and work for an hour on your project? Do you keep yourself to some sort of schedule, or does it happen more organically? What's the way to
I
do
try
it?
to keep myself to a schedule, because I have,
Mm,
since all of my career at the moment is producing artwork for different clients and stuff,
yes.
I always try to keep time for me to do my own projects. And, actually doing the book on sketching sort of emboldened me to do other publishing
Yes.
projects that are just my own
Yes.
stuff.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
because I think you have to make room for that in your own intellectual property, because I mean, I think in the end, those end up being our most important works. Um,
Yes.
I mean, I feel lucky to be able to do a career just doing artwork, and that's really wonderful. But I like now making time for my own project. So it ends up actually being the carrot that, like, if I finish this much on my stuff I have to do, then I'll work on a couple pages of this project that's myself, the project I'm working on
Mm.
for myself. So it's sort of the carrot that keeps me going. I mean, that's sort of how my whole practice has
Yes.
been anyway, because it's really easy, I think, in a lot of creative careers to get burnt out. And I
Yeah.
find working on my own stuff, and that's actually what one thing that urban sketching really helps is it one of the reasons I got into it is because it was stuff that I wasn't doing for a client. I like doing
Yes.
stuff that's just for me, and it makes me remember why I love drawing and stuff. Not that I don't love doing the
Mm.
stuff that I do for clients, but
Yes.
it is work and you have to get it done. It's like bricklaying. You
Yeah.
have to like keep
Mm.
putting one brick on top of the other and finish it. And
Yeah.
so it's a different practice than like just doodling in your sketchbook, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. But you take quite a professional approach to your personal projects as well, because you know that they enrich you so much. And it's pretty interesting, isn't it, with all the disruption in the publishing industry and utterly different models that we'd never heard of Patreon and
Mm-hmm.
Kindle self-publishing 10 years ago, had we? But with all of that, there is something just very deeply satisfying about having a book in your hands that you've produced. Did you find that when you bought your one out?
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting because it involved so many aspects of project management too, and that's sort of and a lot of aspects. I mean, usually I just do illustrations and then hand them off to a designer,
Yes.
and then I don't really have to do that much after that. But this was a lot of different parts of the process that I don't usually get exposed to, but it was really interesting. And it
Yes.
gives you an aspect of control and ownership
Yes.
over it that you don't necessarily have over other things.
So did you have a good collaborative process with your designer and you learned things along the way, and that's
Yes.
now going to inform, it might even inform how you sketch with the view to a next book, isn't it? You'll be
Mm-hmm.
maybe thinking more what's going to work well on the page and what's going to, what is a new innovative approach I can take here, or isn't it, to
Mm-hmm.
tell my story? Yeah.
I think so. And I mean, I also do other types of storytelling too, like say
Ex-
comics or picture books and
sure.
that
So
sort of
you're
thing. And
well.
they all have their own different language and iconography and feel. And I'm interested in I mean, you don't have time to do all of the things. I wish I did.
That's it.
But that's one reason I did the book on sketching, because for years people had asked me if I would do one. And I was thinking, you know, well, as I get older, am I going to be able to manage? I mean, I'm only going to get older, and it's going to be harder to do these sorts of things. So I might as well
Yes.
do it now before it's a much more difficult prospect.
Mm. Mm.
And sometimes you just have to force it in.
Yeah, and I really liked your approach with your book, because you combined a whole lot of things in there. You gave us a taste of urban sketching, and you can see how people new to the activity would get a taste. You shared you shared tips, you showed the finished work, but you gave us an insight into the process, and also you wrote about the place that you live, and that
Mm-hmm.
the character of the place came across really well. And I really like those combinations of things.
Mm-hmm.
I like it in the book that I've produced, and I want to keep. I
Mm-hmm.
do like that, because one of the special things for me is I love the place that I live. I loved it before I sketched, but I kind of love it even more and have got an even deeper connection because I've sketched here in all these
Mm-hmm.
places, down at the beach, sitting on the rocks, sitting in the sand dunes, in the CBD on the waterfront. It really deepens that appreciation of where you live. And it highlights the fact that you actually, and this was important in COVID, the pandemic, that you, yes, it's wonderful to travel, but actually the view out your window and what's out your back door. I mean, you could actually spend a lifetime getting to know that.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, and actually, that's one thing that's so wonderful, I think, about all the different chapters of urban sketching is you learn a lot about where you live because you go to places you wouldn't normally go where you live, like different
Yes,
towns. Like we were just sketching yesterday in downtown Hamilton, which is a little city kind of north of
yes.
Cincinnati, and it's much bigger. I mean, it's a place that not many people go to that live in Cincinnati just because it's an hour away. So you don't necessarily go
So yeah,
another urban
I,
area that's off the
I
beaten
can,
path.
yeah, and you sort of think, oh, I can go there anyway, and it's probably
Yeah.
pretty much like my hometown, so I won't bother. And then probably it was a revelation when you actually went
Yeah, it was
together
really
and
interesting. It had some really beautiful architecture and cute shops and I mean you find that in a lot of places in your own town,
yeah,
or my brother lives in New York City, and it's interesting because a lot of people in New York City, they have everything they need in a 2 block radius. So people that are non-sketchers, if you say, well, let's go here, they'll be like, well, that's like, a 15-minute subway right away. Why should
yeah,
I go there?
yeah,
And that's the thing that's so interesting about sketching is that you go there because you want to see it and draw it and experience it. It makes you more curious about the area around
yes,
you. And I think
yes.
that's one of the things that's really exciting about it. The being able to show, why you care about where you live and all the different areas around where you live that are different, the different landscapes and architecture and all that stuff.
That's right. I'm just thinking about Andrew, one of the members of our group, and I'll just read it's a little sentence quote. He says, and I've got this in the book, before the drawing habit, I wasn't that interested in concrete mixes or old signs on the front of dairies, which are equivalent of our corner store. That's what we call a dairy. But now I seek out those kind of things.
Oh,
And I've
that's
got that
cool.
quote. I've got that quote from him, and it's next to a wonderful sketch he did of the back of a quite a well-known hotel in Cuba Street, which is, as you'll know, quite an exciting. It's a real centre of our cafe scene in Wellington, and it's just the back of a building, and it's got the big air conditioning pipes and the down pipes from the gutter, and it's got graffiti on the wall and the water meter, and it's just exactly the sort of thing that you would see but
Uh-huh.
not look at, or maybe we wouldn't even look at, as you're going about. But that's what happens with urban sketching, isn't it?
You
Like
start looking at those things.
you do. It's great.
So we're about at an hour. Where can people find the book and find you? What are your socials?
I'm on Instagram and Taylor Art, and I also have a smaller little Instagram called Chill Factor Wellington. Because one of the things I started a few years ago, I think in COVID, was setting myself the challenge of swimming, trying to swim all year round in Wellington Harbour, and where
Wow.
Wellington coast, not so much the harbour, but the coast where I live. And there's a number of little swimming groups, and because cold water swimming is quite a thing now, isn't it? So I
Oh,
thought I'd do
fascinating.
a little niche Instagram page just documenting some of those swims and the walks around the coast. So that's called Chill Factor Wellington. It is chilly here. It's by no means tropical. We're at the very start of spring, which is actually the coldest time to swim, and it gets down to 10 degrees Celsius. So I don't know what
Wow.
that Fahrenheit is, but so it's just the two Instagram pages. I need to revive my website, so that's kind of not happening at the moment. But people can go to Amazon and Google. If they just search under Pages in the Wind urban sketching, they'll get to the page with my book Pages in the Wind, which brings together 20 of us Wellington sketches.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, thanks so much for joining me. This has been a really interesting talk.
Thanks so much